Welcome to Caregiving Club On Air. This podcast is dedicated to the millions of family caregivers who want wellness tips and self-care solutions, who seek expert advice, and who want news about healthy aging and how to create well home design in our forever homes. I'm Sherry Snelling, a corporate gerontologist, author, and educator, a TV interviewer, host, and news commentator. I'm joining you from Southern California, where our interviews and news take us all across the country to explore the many ways to help you on your caregiving journey and to lift you up here at Caregiving Club On Air. Welcome to Caregiving Club On Air, and this is our second of 2 November episodes that we have for you, where we're still going to be focusing on November National Family Caregiver Month, but also National Alzheimer's Month and National Hospice and Palliative Care Month. And to that end, we've got 2 really great interviews for you. One is about family conversations around end-of-life care. The other, of course, is around home care and something called board and care for Alzheimer's adults. Then we're also going to switch gears and talk a little bit about the holidays coming up, how to find joy, how to savor the season. We're going to talk a little bit about musical menus and sonic seasoning, which is from my book, Me Time Monday. And we're also going to share with you 2 more new caregiving documentaries, one of which is out from Lauren Miller Rogan and her husband, Seth Rogan, about her caring for her mom. So with that, I'm Sherry Snelling, your host and a gerontologist and author and CEO of the Caregiving Club. And as I mentioned, we've got 2 really great interviews coming up. The first is with Kate DeBartolo, who is with the Conversation Project, which is probably one of the best resources I've ever found on how to guide family caregivers and families in general through the conversations about end-of-life wishes, but also the planning, the long-term care planning, the end-of-life planning that so often we don't want to talk about and why it is so crucial. And this is just a wonderful treasure trove of information that Kate's going to share with us today. And then we also have Nelly Some, who is a new friend. She has a book out called Making a Difference, and that's also the name of her website, makingadifferencewithnelly.com. But she's going to talk about her journey as both a family caregiver and also a professional caregiver, and how she came into this new business model of building a board and care residential home, doing the modifications and everything herself. And she's going to tell us a little bit about what that's all about and also what to look for. What are the things we should be thinking about if we do look at maybe some alternative ways to, if we can't keep our loved ones home, what are some of the alternatives that are open to us and how should we be thinking about that, which I think is really, really critical and really important, particularly as, we're gathering as families around these holidays and thinking about, some of our older loved ones and what their needs are going to be. Now, as I mentioned in Caregiver Wellness News, I'm going to talk about sonic seasoning and musical menus, which is from my book, Me Time Monday. So we're going to get into that. We're also going to talk about some new surveys that are out, one from ARP about older adults and happiness. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my work with Comfort Keepers as their ambassador and spokesperson for National Day of Joy, but also for how to find joy in Alzheimer's, and some work I'm also going to be doing for Hilarity for Charity, which is Seth Rogan and Lauren Miller Rogan's charity on Alzheimer's caregiving. And I'm going to be doing an event with them in February, which is I'm really looking forward to. And again, it's really about how to find joy in our caregiving journeys. And then in Well Home Design News, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about food. We're going to talk about a new survey out about why older adults want to stay living in their homes as long as possible, and it has to do with food. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, which is perfect for this time, for during the season. And then, as I mentioned, in pop culture, we're going to talk about these 2 new documentaries that are out, one from Lauren Miller Rogan and Seth Rogan about caregiving for her mom. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into our Caregiver Wellness News. So for Caregiver Wellness News, I wanted to start with this new survey that just came out from ARP, and it's about older adults over the age of 50 and their happiness levels. And so let me just read you some of the results from this study that was just done about a month or so ago. It says that nearly 9 in 10 adults aged 50 and older are at least somewhat optimistic about their future, with half, which is about 49%, saying they are extremely or very optimistic about their future. Okay, so very interesting there. Now, in this same survey, they don't have as high hopes for just, what's going on globally or even what's going on here in the US, which I think matches up a little bit with what we saw in the recent presidential election. But at least their self-assessed happiness levels look pretty good. And then the other stat that I found interesting was nearly 3 in 10, about 28%, believe their relationships with family and friends have improved over the last 5 years, and 45% feel that these relationships will only get better over time. So really kind of some hopeful findings there, I think. I think it's really important for us as we're all, again, getting together with family and friends during these holidays to be thinking about the joy and the happiness and more of the positivity if we can. We went through a pandemic and so many other things that have really pulled us apart and brought a lot of tension and strife and stress into our lives. I think it's really great, particularly for family caregivers, to feel like maybe there's some hope and optimism and everything out there. One of the things that we know, or I know as a gerontologist and that we study a lot, is there's something called the happiness U curve. And what it shows us is that in our 20s, we start, life, or we're in life mode there. We're pretty happy. As we tend to hit our 40s and definitely our 50s, though, we go down in happiness. And I think this probably is reasonable because, we've got mortgages, we've maybe got kids, and we've got jobs that we're stressing out about, and we're trying to meet all of the inflation and economic woes that we've had and everything else that's going on in life. So that kind of makes sense to me. It's why probably a lot of people talk about midlife crises, right? But then we swing back upwards. And what's really interesting to me is a lot of people think as you get older, you're definitely going to get less positive, less hopeful, less joyful, let's say, less happy, because, we're facing a lot of the challenges of aging and, physical and other issues that may happen. But the reality is it's actually the opposite. We start getting happier in our late 50s. And it just keeps going up from there. And in fact, our peak happiness levels are when we are in our late 70s, early 80s. I think that's pretty phenomenal. I think it's also, again, something to look forward to, right? Or maybe it's because of the wisdom. Maybe it's because we've been through the wars and we've survived everything in life. Maybe we, take a look back and things don't look as bad as we had thought. It looks pretty good and the legacy that we're leaving looks pretty good, or whatever it is. But I think it's a really nice note as we go into these holidays to try to find that happiness and that joy. And in fact, I actually last year became the ambassador and spokesperson, if you will, for Comfort Keepers, to be their person that talks about their National Day of Joy survey. Now, they usually bring that survey out in June, but actually we do a lot of activities throughout the year. I do a lot of media interviews and other things. And in fact, I'll have a link to it. I was just recently on for them, the Balancing Act TV show, which is the host is Montel Williams and Olga Villaverde. And we just filmed in Florida, and it was really great. I was lucky because I flew in and out right between the hurricanes that were happening there. But we were talking about how do you find joy in caregiving, and particularly if you're caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's or dementia, where so much changes in life, and there are those moments, that are really tough. And then, as I also mentioned, I'll be doing some work for Hilarity for Charity, which is Lauren Miller Rogan and Seth Rogen's charity, mostly focused on the younger population, millennials and Gen Z, and their role now in Alzheimer's, which will definitely be affecting them throughout their lives because we're going to have more people with Alzheimer's. How do we address that as the caregivers of our loved ones? And so I'm going to be part of their CareCon, their conference, an event that happens in February. I'm going to be doing a workshop on how to find joy while being a dementia caregiver. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I really appreciate them having me come on board and help out with that because it's a really great conference. A lot of people attend that. So you can check that out. We'll have links to sign up for you if you're interested in joining for that. And, one of the things I talk about is the five senses, right? If we go back to sight, sound, taste, smell, touch, those are our five senses. And those are ways where we can really tap into joyful moments and then savor those moments. We're going to talk about that in our next Well Home Design. But savoring those moments so that they kind of last longer and are imprinted on our brains as long-lasting memories. So, whether it's music that, a lot of us love. I love holiday music. I don't like, though, that it starts almost before Halloween. That always irritates me a little bit. It's like, let me get through each holiday before you start forcing me into the next one. But I love holiday music. It just makes me happy. I have a whole series of movies that I watch, including, of course, the classic "It's a Wonderful Life," which I actually wrote about in my book, Me Time Monday. So there are little rituals and little routines that I really look forward to, but also the sense of the season. I love fall. I love all the cinnamon and cloves and everything. I love the colorful trees. It was really interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine earlier, and she's like, I'm not really into the fall season. I'm like, it's just my favorite season. But whatever your season is, when we can look forward to little small things, and again, thinking about those five senses, it's also really important for our older loved ones, playing the music of their era when they were younger and had those happy moments, or, smelling certain scents of family gatherings and family foods and dishes or whatever it is, putting on a little music, dancing, all that kind of stuff. All of that is really great. And, one of the things that I do talk about and is part of this finding joy moment that I've been talking about with Cover Keepers is maybe take a joy ride. And I just want to do a quick shout out because I think that Chevrolet deserves the advertising awards accolades of the decade for a fantastic commercial they actually put out last holiday season. And it's called A Holiday to Remember. It's a 5-minute mini film, if you will, that was done as an ad. And it's all about a granddaughter helping her get choked up because it's so I cry at commercials, guys. What can I say? But it's all about a granddaughter helping her grandmother tap into those memories of a hometown, taking a joyride, tapping into the memories. And her grandmother, of course, has Alzheimer's, and a lot of the younger kids and others don't really know how to relate to her, don't know how to engage her. And it's a beautiful, beautiful. If you've got 5 minutes to check this out, I'm going to have a link on the episode guide page. You should do so because it not only will tell you more about the disease and what the family caregivers of people with dementia and Alzheimer's go through, but it's also just a beautiful commentary on how to relate, how to be where they're at and help them still find that joy, still find those memories that are somehow locked inside, maybe from long, long ago. There's a lot of ways to do that. And often it is through music. It's through looking at photos from bygone eras. It's driving through hometowns, hopefully that haven't changed too much, but you can say, oh my gosh, that's my high school, or that's this or whatever. Anyway, beautiful, beautiful advertising. Big kudos to Chevrolet. You guys are my heroes because you got it. You nailed it. And so often we don't see that. So, November is obviously Thanksgiving, and then we go right into our holidays in December. And last episode, we talked about National Family Stories Month, which is also in November, and how to share our stories as caregivers and the campaigns that are out there right now, and also how to get our older loved ones to maybe share their stories, capture their memories, have those stories archived forever. There's a lot of really great resources now that can help you do that. But November is also National Hospice and Palliative Care Month. And what's really important is what we need to understand and know about end of life. And, for those of you who may not be familiar, hospice is typically the last, few months of life, few weeks of life. Very often people feel like it's only the last 2 or 3 weeks, but actually hospice care, which is covered under Medicare, is something that can be renewed by a physician. So you are typically terminal, you have to be terminal, but you could still be getting some curative care, and that's more palliative care. So that's where maybe you have a brain tumor, maybe you have a progressive stage 4 cancer, but you are still doing chemotherapy or trying different cures or in a clinical trial or whatever it happens to be. And that's more palliative care. But then you move into hospice care, which is more caring. It's not curative, it's caring care. And that's where they have wonderful care teams that include a chaplain. So there's a spiritual side to it. They have to have, it's a mandate from Medicare that 5% of the team hours have to be volunteer hours. So a lot of people volunteer to be hospice volunteers. They've been through it with their loved one. They love being a comfort source, and it's really just to make you feel as comfortable as you can. And in those kind of last few, again, it could be months, or it could be weeks of life. And so I really wanted to talk to Kate DeBartolo, who is with the Conversation Project, because I have loved this resource and this website for so long. It is fantastic. It's probably one of the best websites that I've ever found. And it's got so much good information, not only just checklists and guidance on how to start these conversations, when to have them, how to have them, who you should be talking to, what kind of maybe documentation or other things you should be thinking about. Kind of also plays a little bit into long-term care, because I mean, obviously they kind of go together, long-term care and then end of life. But the end of life is something we find taboo as a topic, but Kate's going to rethink. She's going to rewire our brains on that thinking. But I just love having Kate on, because I think this is something it's really, really important to know about. And this resource is one that's really going to help you out. So without further ado, because Kate's going to tell all these details to you, here's my wonderful interview with Kate DeBartolo of the Conversation Project. So I am really thrilled to have our expert guest on our episode today, which is Kate DeBartolo from the Conversation Project. And we're going to learn so much about how to really communicate with our loved ones and also within families. And Kate is here to share a whole lot of insights and special tools that the Conversation Project has and all of that. So Kate, welcome to Caregiving Club On Air.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's great to have you, as I said. And of course, the first question we always ask all of our guests is, where are we talking to you from today?
I am calling in from just outside Washington, D.C. Our team is spread out. We got somebody in Cairo, New York, Boston, but I'm just outside of D.C.
Oh, we love that. Yeah, the virtual office situation is seeming to be more and more the norm these days. And beautiful, beautiful, Washington, D.C. You guys are right into the fall weather, so I'm sure it's feeling really crisp and beautiful there.
Yeah.
As I mentioned up front, one of the things I think it's really tough for us as family caregivers is to start these conversations, have these conversations around long-term care and end of life. So first of all, just start by telling us a little bit about what is the Conversation Project and the types of help and services that you provide to family caregivers.
Yeah, so we are a large public engagement initiative of the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. We're totally nonprofit. Everything we offer is free. And we are here. We know that a lot of people want to have these conversations with the people that are important to them in their life about the care they might want through the end of their life. And they don't always know how quite to get started. So we focus on providing tools, helping people think about how to talk about their values, and encourage lots of conversations. For us, we want these conversations to be happening early, often, around the kitchen table, not in the ICU. And for us, conversations are really important. It's obviously in our name. We joke we could be the Conversations Project, because we know this doesn't only happen once. And it's not to dismiss the value of the legal or medical documentation, but we've learned that it doesn't do much good if nobody can find that document, or it's in a manila folder or somewhere, or my favorite, somebody saying, oh, I did that, it's in a safety deposit box, or I did that with my doctor 13 years ago, I'm sure they still have it. But to just normalize talking about this, clarifying our wishes, helping people realize they can have a say in what they want. And I guess I would say it's not just for folks who are older adults. We see this as being for anybody over the age of 18. And we're trying to help normalize that these conversations can really just be about a time where you might not be able to speak for yourself too. What would you want? What are your values? So rather than lots of medical hypothetical scenarios, we try to focus our tools on what somebody's values are, because we know that a crisis is a really hard time to learn.
Well, and we're kind of in the midst of, family time, holiday season, and all of that when we're talking to you. And it's so important. You hit upon something I think that's really vital for our listeners and for family caregivers to know. And that is, sometimes I think we're a little daunted by, okay, this is going to be one big, serious, dramatic conversation. And you mentioned conversations because it really is a series of conversations. We can break things up, kind of ease into it maybe, and then, we know the care journey changes. We might start out with someone who has just been diagnosed or, is just starting to get a little older. And then, of course, sometimes things progress, whether it's Alzheimer's or other issues. I also love the fact that you pointed out it isn't just for older adults. I mean, any adult can face horrific accidents, tragedies. I had a friend who was diagnosed with MS, in her late 20s and early 30s. So, these are the types of things we want to more normalize. Tell us what specifically are the tools, because you guide people on tips and things. We're going to get into that in a minute, but you actually also give literal tools that help people that they can have to have these conversations and then document a lot of the information.
I had one in my hand right now to show on the screen. But we provide a lot of free toolkits. They're free. You can download them, English, Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese. There's video versions of it as well. Like how to have the conversation guide. There's one for people if you've been designated somebody's healthcare proxy or their surrogate or the person who would speak for them. Like, oh boy, I'm somebody's proxy. What do I do? Or how do I choose who I want my proxy to be? We've got tools for that, how to talk to a healthcare team. We have some guides for caregivers specifically, one for caregivers of somebody who might have dementia, Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia, as well as caregivers of seriously ill children. So kind of some unique scenarios to work through and give some additional examples. We also have a really neat workbook for somebody living with serious illness that never mentions end-of-life care. So it's a great one to have in mind. If you've got somebody in your life who would not want to see the word end of life or death or anything related to that, but they've got a serious illness, we can still get to a lot of the same conversation points, and that guide can be helpful. And we've also created a new one called My Health Checklist that's for older adults. It's not end of life specific at all. It's how to kind of think about your care and be prepared for appointments. But we've worked now for over the last 12 years, getting a lot of feedback. We started with one guide that has been adapted a lot since it originally came out, but all of these other tools were based on people saying, do something about this, it'd be really helpful. As well as lots of blogs and people sharing their stories and examples of what their experiences have been. There's we have no say in what somebody's care should be. We just want what you want to be known. So we also focus on social media and kind of storytelling and sharing, so people can learn from others as well.
I love the storytelling part of that, because I do think, again, it shows us we're not alone in this. Every family and everybody goes through this, and it's nice to hear other people's, insights, tips, or how they approached it. One thing I was thinking about is in your toolkit, because I know you mentioned healthcare directives and proxies. Are those actual documents then that would become legally binding? And I know you have to have some of them notarized, but are those actual?
Our tools are not the legal documentation. They often go hand in hand with that. So, and we have on our website a place where you can find, every state has different forms. You can imagine the complexity and the terminology differences. So we can help point you to those resources. And many times a healthcare institution may also have forms that could be filled out. But many folks do it in combination. Okay, you're about to fill out these medical or legal forms. Go through our guides first, because again, we focus on values. Like what matters most to me is, am I concerned about too much care or too little care? Where do I fall along that spectrum? People can start to answer those types of questions and then fill out the legal documents, but also then have a plan for how you're going to tell somebody what your wishes are.
Right. So it really is about not so much the legal paperwork, but facilitating the conversation around all of those things.
I'd say to that, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a lawyer, but I've heard from many healthcare providers that they would rather have a family come in on the same page about what somebody wants in their life. There's a crisis, an emergency, somebody needs surgery, something's gone wrong. They would rather have everybody come in on the same page than one person pull out like a 12-year-old dusty document and nobody else knew about it and they start fighting over it. And so that's one of the reasons why, again, we're focused on conversations and just making sure people are on the same page.
Well, that kind of leads me into my next question. a lot of times we get calls from family caregivers, or I've worked with family caregivers, and the conversation is always around, well, when really should I start to have these conversations? Now, most of us, again, we don't have it until it's a crisis, right? And now everybody's emotions are running high. And as you said, maybe everybody's not on the same page. So what is your advice in terms of when should we start these conversations as a family? And, what are the things that we need to think about in terms of that?
Yeah. Um, as I mentioned earlier, like 18, that's my goal. This is like a muscle that if you keep using it and practicing, it gets that much more comfortable to do. So we've seen, and a lot of young people are okay with this. They realize, yeah, I love mountain biking, or there's natural disasters, terrorist activity. Like there could be a time where I couldn't speak for myself. So it kind of makes sense for them. And many young people are the ones that are comfortable talking to their grandparents. It like skips a generation. So again, the more we can normalize it, just different, I would say early and often. So 18, somebody moving out of home for the first time, maybe life events like getting married or divorced. Both of those are important. You don't maybe necessarily want your ex to be that decision maker anymore. I know my husband and I did it when we got married and then revisited it when we had a child. Different points in life, your wishes may change, and that's okay over time. Could do it each decade, maybe before a big trip. My dad did a big motorcycle trip across the country. We had a conversation then because that's kind of a unique situation. And then we help run something called National Healthcare Decisions Day every year due to a Benjamin Franklin quote of nothing is certain in life but death and taxes. So you do your taxes on the 15th, and on the 16th is National Healthcare Decisions Day. And it gives like an annual punctuation point or an opportunity to revisit and say, is everything still in order? People still know what I want. And I think that one reason for me why these conversations are so critical is I care about the person whose end of life we may be discussing or care we may be discussing, but also for the caregivers or the people, kind of the circles out, to be able to grieve the loss of your person without such complex and complicated grief of, am I still talking to my sibling? Am I second guessing everything I did because mom never told me what I wanted? So we've seen data of like the depression rates for somebody after the loss of somebody important in their life are a lot lower 6 months out if they had talked about it and they felt like they knew what somebody wanted.
Well, that's really interesting. I love that. When we're talking about more older parents, in-laws, grandparents, even, sometimes I know, older people are a little hesitant to talk about again, facing the end of life. Don't maybe want to have that conversation. And very often, you'll have older parents that'll say, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's all handled," or here's the lawyer's number. Call the lawyer and when something happens or whatever. So what advice would you give for family caregivers out there who may be getting a little pushback from older loved ones about actually having these conversations?
Yeah, I would say I got a couple of tips in that area. One would be walk the walk. Like before you're trying to bring this up with them, it's so much more authentic. If you say like, I've been doing this myself and here's what I've been thinking, it made me realize I'm not quite sure what you might want in that situation, but to not have it just be about age or illness, like this is something we do as adults, and I want to be sure that we're talking about that. I also feel that this is so much more about how you want to live your life through the end. This is not like the dying part is the short part, right? You are living until you are dying. And so I think that some of that phrasing or framing can go over a little bit better. Sometimes this may not be one big hunky-dory, let's sit down and talk about everything. It might be smaller bites. You might use current events. Either, Jimmy Carter has been in hospice for something like 18 months right now, or a public figure who's sharing their story, or a film or a book or something like that you're reading that can be kind of the icebreaker. But I do think that there's a lot of framing around honor and respect. If this person had cared for you at some point, you cared for me for a lot of part of my life. I want to be sure I'm doing right by you, and that especially if it's maybe a parent who loves to help their kids, like I need your help with something. Like this is making me nervous, and sometimes parents are more open to that. But sometimes that lack of conversation is telling you something too. Some people, they really don't want to talk about it. It's not worth forcing, like this is meant to be in service of them. And so that may be telling you something about what their concerns are. For some people, it's easier to do yes, no questions. I remember a woman who described her husband as Eeyore, that he like just never wanted to talk about this. And it was really important to her. And so she looked through our materials, and rather than asking him all the questions, she said, okay, if I had to make decisions on your behalf, well, actually, if something happened to you, is it correct to assume you would want me to be the decision maker? Yes, no. Yes. Okay, great. Got it. Here's what I think you would want if you couldn't. Does that sound right? Yeah, but here's one thing I would change. That was a much easier approach for him than, oh, could we sit down and have this big conversation? For some people, they want to talk about it a lot. For others, they don't. And so really trying to focus on what matters to them and realize that you might have to approach it over time. It might be something you bring up once and you say, oh, when I come next time, maybe we could talk about it, but not to get too frustrated if the first go doesn't result in a big conversation.
And I love that. I think obviously we have to play into the personalities and, different nuances of our loved ones. But as you said, starting this early, particularly I do a lot of work in Alzheimer's and dementia community, and you want to have the input of your loved one before they reach a stage when they really can't participate in communicating things with you or having maybe the right paperwork and other things in place. And I know with my own mom, what I learned is when my stepfather was still alive, the two of them felt like, okay, we're in this thing together. We're going to make sure our kids are taken care of, but we don't need to talk to them about it or whatever. But when my stepdad passed and my mom now became a widow, then, she started being more open and we started having more conversations, little things here and there, because again, I think she felt a little bit more vulnerable and who's going to be my partner in this. And that's that was my experience.
That's a great example too of like, pay attention and listen, because you might be hearing little drops of like, oh, this happened to Susie down the street. Like, I sure wouldn't want that. Or something like where it might not be a whole conversation, but they're making comments about something. And that could either be your in to ask a little bit more or to kind of pull together what do we know about what she's said in the past. That can be really helpful.
Right. Now, the flip side of that is I've also heard from family caregivers who don't want to face this. They don't want to have that conversation. They don't want to think of their parent or grandparent dying, and they just don't want to go there. What would you say to them, or what would you say to maybe some of our older listeners who are saying, I really do want to share some of this with my daughter, and she just won't talk about it?
Yeah. I think it also goes with this idea of wanting to not give up hope, or somebody who might be praying for a miracle, and that kind of what we're hoping for may change over time. Like in the beginning, we're hoping for a cure, and later on it might be comfort or as much time as possible. And so not feeling like talking about this is giving up on your person. So I want to give people permission for that. The online satirical magazine, The Onion, had a headline of, new study shows death rate holds steady at 100%. Like this is, I think we all know technically that we are all mortal, but that's still really hard to address with your person. I think that if you're somebody who wants to bring this up, warming them up, again, giving a little heads up that this is something you want to do. I met a woman who she hosted Thanksgiving and made desserts every year for her family. And she held all of them hostage, all the desserts, and said, no pumpkin pie till you tell me how you want to die. And made everybody go around the table and say what she wanted. That worked for the dynamic of her family. That might absolutely not work for the dynamic of yours. So, helping them, picking kind of a comfortable setup, not springing it on somebody who might be upset in a particular moment, giving them a heads up, using what you know about that person. If they like books or movies or a board game or card game, there are all sorts of examples about that around end of life topics.
Right.
Again, us focusing on our values can be really helpful, as opposed to like CPR and feeding tubes. Like that can be a little overwhelming for people. And you may not have a ton of time. So picking like, what's the one or two things I really want this person to know? So for example, that question that I shared before, are you concerned about too much care or too little care? Those are wide ranges. Sometimes spouses are on opposite ends of that spectrum. So verbalizing what you are. And then I think choosing a healthcare proxy who will honor your wishes. Maybe
Mhm.
the person who's your day-to-day caregiver isn't the person who you should have as your healthcare proxy if they say, oh, I could never do that for you, mom. Like, please don't make me make those decisions. Like
Right.
then say, okay, great. Then I'm going to ask I would love for you to be here and holding my hand and offering a lot of support. And I'm going to ask my cousin to be the person who interfaces. And many times that can be a relief to say, I don't want you to have to be the one who has to deal with these questions. So I'm going to choose this other person, and that's in honor of you, not that I'm taking anything away from you, but really thinking about who the proxy is that you would want to make those decisions. And then sometimes it's easier to put it in writing, like just an email, like, hey, I know you didn't really want to talk about this, but here are some things I really want you to know so that you can refer back to this if you ever need to, or a letter or a video or something where you're still getting your message out. And then I would say this is again where it is important to legally make it official and make it known and make sure your doctors know. If you imagine, oh, there's some tension happening between these two people in my life, like you can be proactive about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it was tough for my mom, and it's me and my brother, and we get along really great, which is, good news on that front. But my mom was really hesitant to choose one or the other. I think she wanted to be fair. And so she said, "Well, you'll just decide together." And I kept trying to say,
Yeah.
Mom, they're going to ask who, and not to say that we would have a difference of opinion, but what if we did? I don't know. Sometimes again, in the emotion of the time. Something else that's also kind of more humorous is I interviewed Joan London, who used to be the host of Good Morning America. A lot of people know
Mhm.
her from a lot of healthy lifestyle stuff she's done, but she actually told me that her mom was, like me, a control freak, and I've done the same thing. I found it very funny. She had planned her funeral. I mean, she knew the song, she knew the kind of flowers she wanted, she knew, the suit she wanted to be buried in.
Yeah.
And in a way, it almost became kind of funny for Joan and
Yeah.
her mom to talk about how this is going to go down, So
Yeah.
there can be some humor sometimes too.
Oh, absolutely. There's sometimes where there can be tears, but there can be a lot of funny stories or examples of things that have happened in the past, or, ooh, don't put me in that dress, or I don't want that song, or, for us, we're focused a bit more on the care somebody would want to receive up to the end of life, but many times it does segue into other pieces.
Yeah. Now, you also touched on something that I think is so critical and that we see so often in families because they do wait until there's a tragic crisis or something's going on with mom or dad or grandparents. And that is the family dynamic, the family conversation.
Yeah.
So we know that sometimes these conversations might start with, you, if you're the primary caregiver and your loved one that you're caring for, but ultimately we want to try to get the family on the same page, knowing everything. What can you tell us about family conflict, how to avoid it? What are the things or that you've seen or tips that you have for families?
I think it goes back to this idea that you don't necessarily have to have the conversation with everybody all at once. These can be individual conversations. My mom was one of seven. She was the healthcare decision maker for her parents. She had more in-depth conversations with them than everybody else did. But so identifying who's the one person you want to make decisions, maybe a backup person, you talk more deeply with them, and then you let everybody else know who you chose. Because rather than then you don't have everybody showing up. Well, mom told me that I was supposed to be it. Oh, well, she told me this, or we had different conversation. Um, I also want to comment on the concept of loved ones, because I would say that there are many people who are caregivers in a dynamic that are not always the most loving, or there could be some friction or past life where we're responsible for somebody that we don't always feel a lot of affinity for, or maybe you've had kind of hard situations in the past. Or there's somebody that we specifically do not want involved from our family, large family. I know we've seen that particularly in the LGBTQ plus community.
Mm.
It's important that X person from my bio family not be the decision maker. And so that's really important to get that documented, because they may not respect who my partner is, or here's why I don't want them involved. So I think it's important to think about your family dynamic. Anybody listening is going to know their unit best. Are these generally people who are going to get along? Are they not? Who do I need to kind of head off? I remember a woman who I met who said, I'm my husband's healthcare proxy. We've talked about it, but I'm his second wife and he's got two adult children and they don't know that he chose me. And I'm now realizing this will start World War III. And all he has to do is give them the heads up. hey
Yeah.
kids, Barbara and I have been talking about stuff. I want you to know she's the person who's going to make these decisions. She knows what I want. It's not inviting them to be part of a whole debate about it, but it's still giving the heads up. Um, and so that idea of, I want you to know I chose this person to be my proxy. That means they'll make my decisions. We talked about it. They know what I want. I want you to be able to focus, on our time together. Or I think there's a lot of people who have that fear of, I don't want to upset one that I chose the other, but we can give people different roles also. One person might be in charge of finances, somebody else. In my mom's big family, that's how it was. One person was in charge of the decor and the decorations and making sure her house felt good, and one took the dog, and one, people had different roles. And this is a time where it's really important, if it matters to you, the type of care you get. There are some people who actually don't have very strong preferences and they just want people to do what makes them feel best in the moment. But if it really matters to you, this is a time to find somebody who will speak for
Yeah.
you. You've made every other major medical decision in your past. You don't want to leave this one up to chance.
Well, and I think, you touched upon kind of blended families, right? Where we might have half siblings and stepmom, stepdads, whatever it is. I think you're right. I think it's a responsibility on the part of the person whose wishes, we want to honor. And then it's up to those people to hear that, and again, to honor that, even if you don't agree with it. I know we've had some horrific cases. The one that comes to mind is Casey Kasem, the radio DJ, where he never told his adult children from his first marriage kind of what he wanted. And so then his second wife, who didn't have a great relationship with them, it just became Hatfields and McCoys. And I think we see that a lot. So I think that's where the conversation becomes really vital to avoid all that conflict for everybody. Because once you hear it, it's like, okay, now I'm not putting my own ideas into this. This is what dad said he wanted, and I'm going to have to honor that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, this is all such great information, and I can't thank you enough because, again, what would you advise? Because as I mentioned, this episode will air during holiday season. Are holidays a good time to start these conversations or not?
I think that's going to depend on your dynamic. It's probably not the moment like when the turkey's coming out and somebody's feeling really frazzled, like the no pumpkin pie till you tell me how you want to die. That it can work and it can really backfire. It could be helpful if like, oh, I'm going to be in town and maybe over the weekend when I'm there, like I would love to talk to you about this. I think that so that one's gonna depend. It's a nice time sometimes where you get a bunch of people together. And so we know of campaigns. There's a health system that does a Talk Turkey campaign. They know a lot of their staff are going home. Here's some healthcare proxy forms, like go talk and be with your people. But I think I can't give blanket advice on whether or not holidays are good or bad. It can be good, like New Year's resolution. This is something I want to get tied up, or I'm working on this, and could we have some time to talk about it when we're together?
Right. And then, we didn't really touch upon it, but the children, and sometimes the children are adult children, this is their grandparents, or sometimes they're younger. Do you have information and tips on, getting children involved in the conversations?
I would say we do not have great tips in that. It depends on what age of child. As I mentioned, there
Yeah.
are some that are like the young adults, late teens, young adults who have come across this. They feel more comfortable with it. We've gotten stories from people where it's the grandkids who stop the line. We're like, what are you people doing? Like aunts and uncles and parents, like it is so clear this is not how grandpa lived his life. How are you not seeing this? And so they sometimes can draw attention to this is not what he would have wanted or what she would have wanted, or being willing to talk about it. And again, sometimes grandparents will do anything for their grandkids. So maybe that's the easier opening of, and anybody listening today, I feel like you've got the best excuse. I heard about this project, the conversation project, this is how it's working. So I think it can be useful. We don't have as much about engaging young children in it. It's more for caregivers of a seriously ill child, how you might get their wishes known.
Special needs. Well, and again, I love that you do cross the lifespan. Any adult should really be having these conversations with their friends and their families and families of choice. Tell us again what, the tools that you have are wonderful. Where can our listeners find that information?
So we have a website, theconversationproject.org. where anybody can go and download those guides. And then we also have a bunch of social media platforms, Convo Project or the Conversation Project, where you can find some stories there. I would say the blog posts are also helpful. This idea of autonomy. There's some people who write about, like, I want people to do exactly what I said, no matter what. And others who say, well, I just want you to do what you think is best. But either way, that's the conversation to have. So I really want people listening to not, if you don't feel very strongly about your care, that's still important to tell other people. So they're not second guessing. I don't know, mom never said anything.
Right.
It's like, oh, this is what mattered to her, is that she didn't want to have to make all of these decisions and wants us to make the call later.
Right, right. Well, and again, it's such an important, guide. I think it's a thing we often overlook. We get very involved in the physical care of our loved ones. We don't realize how important these conversations and things are. So, Kate, thanks so much. You've really given us so much to think about, and I know our listeners will really value this information. We're going to have a link to the Conversation Project on our episode guide page. Any last tips or thoughts for our audience?
I don't think so. I think it's, again, if you're ever coming up against an issue, trying to think about what the values are behind it. So a concept that comes up a lot for us is people who say somebody wants to die at home and they couldn't honor that wish. It got too medically complicated or financially or physically difficult on a fifth floor walk up. But trying to unpack, what would home mean? For my grandmother, it was having her cat with her. That was the big thing. If you could find a place where her cat could go, which we did, she was all set. For others, it's knowing family will visit, or home cooked meals, or putting pictures on the wall, private room. And so depending on what the answers are people have, like what is behind that, and really encouraging people to give current answers. Don't answer these questions as a hypothetical scenario down the road. What would you want right now if you couldn't speak for yourself? And then the idea that you can revisit that over time, depending on the prognosis you get or life changes. But so not to just see this as a one and done thing.
Yeah, which is really great. Well, Kate, again, thank you for the wonderful conversation, the great insights and tips from the Conversation Project. We really enjoyed having you on the episode.
Thank you for having me.
So wasn't that great information from Kate? I mean, just again, such a wealth of great information for families to think about as we're gathering for holidays. It may not be the right time during the holidays to have these conversations, but we'll be paying more attention, right? Looking for certain red flags. And maybe, starting to broach a little bit of, hey, mom, I'd like to talk to you, next week or whatever it happens to be. I think, again, you can take a lot of great takeaways there from Kate. Also want to do just a quick shout out because we're talking about end of life and obviously hospice care. And we did a great interview with Jim Toey of the 5 Wishes. And it's a document that you can find online, but it's a really great interview. And again, it's about how to think about your 5 wishes for end of life. And that was season 2, episode 19. We're going to have a link to that on our episode guide page. So with that, let's shift gears now and let's talk a little bit about home care and a companion to kind of home care called board and care. Most older adults want to stay living in their homes as long as possible. When you have a loved one with dementia or Alzheimer's, that becomes really difficult sometimes in the later stages of the disease because of the nature of the disease. And so a lot of Alzheimer's caregivers I've talked to have gone for the option of board and care. Now, what is that? Well, it is essentially a residential home is in a residential neighborhood, and it's operated by professionals. Obviously, they've been through a lot of training, including dementia care, but only 6 to 10 adults live in the home, and they live with their professional caregivers who are there 24/7. What's wonderful, though, is it is a home environment. So there's a living room, there's a kitchen, they have their own bedroom and bathroom. And so it's not as unsettling for some who have dementia, who might think about memory care, assisted living, and then they go into these larger communities and they're like, who are all these people? What's going on? So it's a really nice option. If you can't keep your loved one at home, think about something like board and care. So Nelly Some, fascinating person. I was so excited I got introduced to her. She has a book and her company is called Making a Difference with Nelly. And so she's going to tell us about her journey as both a family and a professional caregiver. She's going to talk about this board and care and the home modifications that are important, what to think about, certainly as family caregivers, and also, how you can make these kinds of settings work for you. And it's just a really great conversation with Nelly. So here we are with Nelly Some of Making a Difference. So I am really excited to have our guest on today, who is Nelly Some of Making a Difference. And Nelly's story is really, really interesting. And by the way, we were connected by a mutual friend, Sean Perry. A little shout out to Sean Perry at the Senior Zone, who had connected Nelly and I just recently, and we had a chat. And I just thought her story and also the services that she's providing to caregivers is so important as we start, thinking about families. We're getting together for the holidays and everything. It's just a great time to bring Nelly on. So, Nelly, I want to welcome you to Caregiving Club On Air.
Thank you so much for having me, Sherry.
Of course. Now, as I mentioned, our first question is always we ask people, where are we talking to you from today?
I am in Seattle, Washington.
Wonderful. And how's the weather up there?
It's kind of better today. Yesterday, the whole week's been a little bit cool.
Yeah, we're starting to feel that fall, right? We're starting to get into fall. Well, Nelly, as I said, I really enjoyed your story and your journey because it really takes us from personal caregiving, professional caregiving. So I want to just start by asking you, what is your caregiving journey? How did you get started in this? And then we'll get into some more detail. But just tell us about that journey for you.
I should say, Sherry, my journey started back in Africa, in Kenya. I personally come from Kenya. I was raised up with my grandmother since I was 2 weeks old. And as I grew up with my grandmother, she used to be so sickly a lot. And I learned to be a caregiver as early as 4 years old because I would be the one taking care of her so many times. So when I came here in America, it was no-brainer that the profession I would go for was become a caregiver. And that's how I started becoming a caregiver.
Yeah, and I love that. I spent 2 years living with my grandparents and my grandmother when my parents divorced. And there's something special in having grandparents in our lives, and I took care of her after she had a stroke, kind of similar to you, but I was a little older. I was in high school. And I just think that connection and that relationship is so important. So you came here and you had already caregiving experience, clearly caring for your grandmother, but how did you get into your caregiving business and what you're doing now?
It's funny, when I arrived in America, of course, I used to be a tour guide as I grew up in Africa. I became a tour guide. So when I arrived in Seattle, clearly, as you know, there's no lions and elephants in in Seattle Airport. So I had to think what to do next. What kind of a profession I'll go for, and that's why I talked to people around, and I realized caregiving was the best thing I could go for because that's what I really knew. And, I went to school for my nursing, but I started as a home health aide for a long time. I became a CNA, certified nursing assistant. Then after that, I started my school for nursing, but in the middle of it, I was almost done. I got married, I got a baby. And, in between there, I was working as a caregiver in so many facilities. I worked in assisted living, nursing home, home cares, name it. But there was this particular place that I really loved. I tried working for adult family home for a short time, just to give me a break from long hours with the big facilities. And I loved it, Sherry. There's something about me that I really love caregiving since I was born. I guess it comes from my grandmom, of course, but I love that one-on-one care. It's very important to me. And I felt in the big facilities, I never had that because it was all about the numbers. You're given so many patients. I didn't really have the time to have that one-on-one care. So when I went to the adult family home, the small group homes, I was impressed of how, I felt that every senior there really got a personalized care. I was able to sit down, talk to them, know them, really have that, connection with them, which was very important to me. And that's really how I ended up, and after that, I ended up working full time. I managed a few adult family homes. Fast forward, I was able to buy my first home, which I managed myself. And after that, I had several of them. And that's how I advocate for group homes of senior homes, because I feel that, with the small group homes, it really makes, it helps a senior to thrive.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I've heard so many stories, and I do a lot of work in dementia and Alzheimer's, and particularly in that community, I've heard that the group homes, the smaller, where there's only maybe 6 to 10 residents or whatever, it is better for them. The environment, it's not as different from being at home, obviously. And
Correct.
and I love when you've talked about you could just really give that kind of loving, patient-centered, care that we all talk about. And it does become more difficult when you've got this huge caseload, huge workload. So I think that it's really wonderful. So really what I really love about your story is obviously you've worked in a lot of different caregiving settings, and then you went and became an entrepreneur yourself and started, a group home, but you also wrote a book called Making a Difference. So tell us a little bit about that book and what it shares with people.
Sherry, making a difference comes from my long history of becoming a caregiver and working so many facilities. And as I worked as a caregiver, so many times I saw many things that were being done wrong on these big facilities. And just as a caregiver, I didn't have any power to do anything about it. So when I started running my own businesses, the one first thing that was very important to me is to make it right from the culture that I incorporated in my companies. And I did talk to my staff, and I still continue talking to providers who are taking care of seniors, that you know what, this business of caregiving, you have to have the passion for it. It's not about the business, because it's not gonna last. So those are some of the things I'm teaching in this book, that from a caregiver, when you want to be a provider, how to go about it, how to really run a successful business, but with passion. The passion is the key. And also, I realized that there were so many adult family home there that they didn't really have the business experience of how to really navigate the business itself from caregiving. And it's as simple as really maintaining the environment of the business, making sure that the homes they are running, they are clean, and and that's the only way you can really not only take good care of the caregivers, the residents, I say, but that's how you attract more customers. So some of those things I'm trying to teach in this book, because I realize, we are caregivers, we have the passion, but most of us caregivers don't really have the other business sense of it, but they're good people. How can I help them to thrive, but also do what they do best? And lastly, also, if not least, is the investors. After running these senior homes themselves, myself, and I used to fix them myself, construction and remodel them to make them perfect for seniors. I realized we really have a lot of shortage of great senior homes out there. Yeah, as I said, though we have so many wonderful nurses and caregivers who love what they do, Sherry. But one thing they're missing is just having a great home to run the business. And that's why I decided in my book to kind of reach out to investors out there to help out. Not only is this business a good business for a wonderful cash flow, but I think it's really a very good business that not only are you going to be making money, but you're going to be really making a world a better place for seniors to thrive. And all those combined, if you go to my book, I really cover the caregivers part of it, providers, investors, but also family members. I try to talk to family members and give them the tips on what to look for a good senior home, what to do when that time comes when your loved one needs to be moved out. So all those good things are in the book. So I really encourage everybody to check it out.
Absolutely. We will have a link to your book on the site, as well as the book cover that we asked you for. Now, we're going to encourage our listeners to go buy your book, but are there any tips that you can share right now that if a family member is looking to either bring in home care or maybe consider a group home, more of that small home movement, but any just like top line 1 or 2 tips you can give to families out there?
It's all about care, Sherry. Because I've realized most of the time, family members, when they're looking for a place for their loved one, they're looking at the big facilities and how fancy the facilities. Oh, I say, no, no, this is out of my own experience. Look for the care. Because at the end of the day, it's really care what really matters. And, I tell family members to also plan themselves ahead of time. Don't wait until the last minute when you get like a shock, like, your loved one goes to the hospital and they're told not to go back. So start preparing, all the seniors and all the families start preparing early for the worst scenarios so that the seniors can really have a say on where they want to go when that time comes.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. And, you're so right. I think so often families, we get excited because we see a beautiful fountain and gorgeous, gardening and all that. And that's wonderful. And that's beautiful environment. But that doesn't mean that inside that care is going to have that same level of quality or personalization that you're
Yeah.
talking about, that you really get in more of that smaller, kind of home setting, which
Correct.
a lot of people don't think about, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I talk to a lot of caregivers out there when I go out and, do talks and stuff, and a lot of them sometimes wind up in a board and care or adult group home, but they don't start there. It's almost like, Goldilocks. It's like they try out all these other things first, and then
Yeah,
they finally find out that this is the perfect fit.
exactly.
Yes. So I also wanted to talk about, you've obviously you've had to also, as you did everything. You had to know about real estate so you could find the right, place to start your business and get one of these homes and do all the modifications yourself, which is pretty amazing. So tell us just a little bit about what are some of the things that you really focused on to find that perfect place and create it into the perfect place.
Location, Cheryl. It's very important that we look for a location that really, first of all, is friendly, of course, for seniors, but also close to, to all the necessities that we might need, you might need as a senior. For example, a hospital should be around in case of any emergency, things like that. The roads, it has to be somewhere really quickly in case of any emergency for your loved one. They can be rushed to the hospital whenever needed. But also, it's very important to me when I had my own senior homes, it really to provide like a safe haven for the seniors. Simple things to me, I was raised up in the country, so always having a garden is very important to me. And I transferred that to my senior homes. Every senior home I had a little yard on the side, on the backyard. For so many reasons. One, for even the exercises, the seniors can get out of their house, enjoy the fresh air, but walk around. If you don't have a yard, have a little beautiful, nice balcony where a senior can sit down there and kind of enjoy the fresh air. Those little things really go a long way when it comes to seniors' life to thrive. In terms of inside, make sure that it's probably a rambler is always the best to have that, first level so that we don't have so many steps to go through and, for safety reasons, they don't fall. But also make sure the doors are wide enough so that, they can't trip themselves, especially when we have seniors who have dementia, Alzheimer's, they need extra care. So those little things means a lot. And also the lighting. Sherry, I can't believe so many times, you can't believe so many times I've gone to some of these homes and I enter in, you can barely see anything going in. It's like, are you kidding me? We are taking care of vulnerable adults who have so many challenges. We are talking about physically, we are talking about their eyes, they can't see well. So make sure the lighting, is all over. The lighting is enough for the home and all those things. So those are some of the tips that when I'm looking for a house myself to fix for the adult family home, and when family members are looking for a place to maybe, fix it for their seniors to drive there. Those are some of the little things you never even think about it, but it's important, very
It
important.
is important. I love that because we do, yeah, we get cooped up inside. We spend way too much time inside anyway. So getting outside, fresh air, all those wonderful things, the greenery of a yard is just really, really beautiful and really healing, right? I mean, that's part of the healing, the health process is having that around us. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to throw you a little curveball because I know we didn't talk about this, but hopefully you'll play ball with me here. I'm curious, do you see a difference in the culture that you were brought up in Africa and Kenya, and then the culture here in America? And let me just premise this. I feel like our generations are not as connected. Now, I lucked out because I had that wonderful relationship, as I mentioned, with my grandparents, kind of grew up with them for a couple of years, stayed really close with them. But I don't always see that these days. And I just wondered what your thoughts were being in two different cultures. Is one better than the other, or do you see a difference? What do you think?
I can't really say one is better than the other. What I can say, they're different for sure. And when I go back to the Africa, we were raised up to take care of our seniors for so many reasons. First of all, there are no facilities you can take for your seniors. That's another reason you're kind of stuck with your, with
You think you have to become a caregiver?
You have to be. But if that culture is naturally there, so you never even think about that. At one point your mom or your dad has to go to a place. Secondly, that's just the slow pace of Africa. It's not like a speed. Here everything is work, work, work. The speed here, you can't even control it. In Africa, you might as well call a neighbor. Most of the women, by the way, they don't work a lot. So they stay home moms, a lot of them. I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of them. So you have that kind of a family village taking care of each other. So that is easy. Well, coming here, it's totally different. You don't really blame the culture. That's why I'm saying you can't say which one is better. It's really different because here with the workload, with the American culture, you can even share it when you want to take care of your loved one. It's almost impossible because you're supposed to work. You have kids, you have your own life, and you don't have that extended family to help you out. So so that's the difference. I think the difference between the advantage I got from becoming a caregiver from Africa to here is it was just something that was in my nature. So I just came in and I just love doing it because it's something I knew how to do it. So it's just part of me. I don't even question why. I mean, I work living, 12 hours, like 24 hours living for caregivers, and I love it. Some people here, I had caregivers, by the way, speaking of cultural difference. I had caregivers from American staff before. And whenever we have maybe a shortage of staff and you ask them to work extra, they're like, oh, no, 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 no. My shift was 6 hours. My shift was 10 hours. So those little things. But with me from Africa, you tell me to work 24 hours. I'm like, yeah, sure.
Right.
But because you can't blame that staff.
Right.
It's just the culture. You have hours, you need to work, they already have so many things, all schedule. It's all about the schedule, the time. With Africa,
Right.
the slow pace really helps. It's not good, but it helps in the caregiving when you come in.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about that before because you're right. It's like, it's not maybe necessarily that the staff doesn't want to do the extra work, but they've got to rush home and take care of their own family or get somewhere or do whatever. And you're right. There are times when I feel like I wish we were a little bit of that slower pace. Sometimes in America, I mean, we do wonderful, great things, but it gets a little crazy. We need to just like take a breath.
And I will mention something on that note, Sherry. I've stayed with families members. As I said, I ran a few homes, but there's so many family members that felt guilty anytime they are trying to place their loved one to a facilities or a home. We discuss this a lot. They will feel guilty, like they're abandoning their parents or they're abandoning, things like that. I tell families, do not feel guilty about it. If anything, you are doing the best. That is the best thing you can do. accept the help when you need it, because
Yeah.
it's better to get your loved one be taken care of, and then you stop being a caregiver, but be the loving daughter, the loving son, be there for them. And also on the other side, I've seen seniors who are couples, they're both older, and one of them is really hanging there to take care of either the husband or the wife until it's too late. They end up, hurting themselves. Then all of a sudden, both of you cannot really help each other. So do accept, don't feel guilty about that as a spouse, a senior. Just know, it's okay to reach out for help. It's okay for you. It's okay for your loved one. And at that time, trust me, if you do that, so many of them have advised them, and later on they tell me, Nelly, you're so right. I'm now relaxed. I feel a peace of mind with my husband or my wife who is in the facility. Now I get to visit him or her. I'm enjoying that time. I don't feel overwhelmed becoming a caregiver and all that. And especially sometimes when seniors, especially their loved one, has got dementia or Alzheimer's, their attitude, as you know, Cheryl, because of the disease, really changes. And it's
Yeah.
very, very, very hard for the family to grasp the changes. So sometimes it brings a lot of tension. It's okay. It's okay. Please, I do advise you guys, whenever you need that help, go get a help. Nothing guilty, nothing bad about it, because it's all about the senior's life to thrive. And also you need time for yourself too.
Well, I love that. That's something I know I've talked about a lot, throughout my career, but I love that you bring that forward, that there is a lot of care that is needed, and some of it is a little bit more health or medical focused. And, when you're a family member, first of all, you're not trained on that, and you're trying to do that, and it can become frustrating or, exhausting, and then you're burned out. So what you're saying is, listen, let's be care partners. Let's form a care team. I can take care of the daily health needs, and you can come in and, like you said, and be that adult daughter, or be that wife, or whomever, and enjoy your loved one. I love that. I think that's a perfect scenario. And
Yeah.
obviously having a partner like you, Nelly, I mean,
And
I'm sure my listeners would be like, okay, can we clone Nelly? Can she just like be everywhere?
I used to be a home health caregiver for so long, so I really understand. I think nowadays when I talk so much about transferring to facilities and all that. But from the point of caregiving, home care, it's the same thing. When you're taking care of your loved one in the house, it's okay. Once in a while, hire somebody part-time a few hours to give you a little break, go do something, and kind of get that everything fresh back to reset. That's
Right.
okay to do that.
It's perfect. Well, Nelly, it's been a delight talking to you, and I'm sure our listeners have really gotten so much great information and really gotten some insights as to what this world is all about if they haven't experienced it already. So tell us again, now your book is Making a Difference. As I said, we're going to have a link on our episode guide page to your book. And then where can our listeners find out more about you and your business?
You can visit our website at www.makingadifferencewithnelly.com. Or you can also Google, of course, my name. It's in Amazon. It's in Barnes and Noble. Nelly Some, Making a Difference with Investing for Seniors. Sometimes I have to think a little bit about it. So Making a Difference, Investing in Better Lives for Seniors. So, and my name is Nelly, Nellly. My last name, by the way, it's always a problem. Some, people call me Sam, but it's really Some, Some.
So May. Well,
Yeah.
Nelly, again, it has been wonderful having you on the podcast. Thank you so much for all of your great insights and this great interview.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for having me. And hello, I will say hello to all the seniors out there. Love you guys. Take care. And, caregivers, take good care of yourself too.
Wasn't that a great and delightful interview with Nelly? She is really a wonderful person and doing such great work up there in Seattle. We wish her the best of luck. So, as we turn into our well home design news, we've been talking about home and and all the wonderful things that are happening during the holidays. And of course, with Thanksgiving coming up, we turn to food. It's a thing that I think we most associate. It's family, friends, football, and food, right? But I came across something really interesting, which was a new survey that was recently done among older adults saying one of the biggest reasons that older adults would like to stay living in their homes longer is because the food is not very good, according to them, in the senior living communities. It's more like cafeteria food. And in fact, the survey that was done showed that they feel that there's not a very great variety. It's not very flavorful, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And the quality, again, is just it's kind of more cafeteria food where they want to go to a 5-star restaurant. Or at least have the home cooked meal that they're so used to in their own homes. So I thought that was really kind of interesting because as we go into the holidays, food becomes really important. We have our favorite dishes and all the things that are coming up. And I came across another article that was about how do we savor joyful feelings? And that's something, of course, that, I've been doing a lot of work on now for the last 20 years, talking about caregiver self-care, talking about joy and happiness, and really focusing on that a lot with my gerontology work. And so, savoring the season kind of connotes this sense of the food and the smells and all of that. And it is very true. I'm always talking about our 5 senses and how we can bring that happiness into our lives with that. But savoring the season also has another kind of definition. And that is, what are the small things that you can do for yourself? And you know me, I always talk about small things in my book, Me Time Monday. It's all about 7 minutes or less if you can. We're now doing the self-care in 7 minutes videos that you can find on our YouTube channel. What are the small things you can do to savor the season? Whether it's, maybe driving around the neighborhood and looking at all the beautiful decor and lights. You take maybe the long route to work or to the grocery store, wherever it is you're going, and just take those couple of extra minutes and savor that. Or maybe it is cooking your favorite meal, whether it's going to be for the whole family gathering or just for you. The music, as I mentioned earlier, I love the holiday tunes that come out, so I always look forward to that. But whatever it is, how do we maybe spend a couple extra minutes in the shower, just feeling that wonderful warm water cleansing all of the toxins and all the emotions that we need to start our day with a better kind of positivity. There's a lot of little small things we can do for ourselves, and it's all very personalized. But I always, again, I invite you and encourage you to think about the 5 senses. What can you taste? What can you touch? What can you see? What can you hear? What can you smell? Those are kind of the things that ignite our brains and our brain health and really connect to make those memories a little longer lasting, have that joy be a little longer lasting. So I really encourage you to think about savoring the season. Now, I want to turn to music because we know how powerful it is, and particularly in a loved one who has dementia, we know that music memory is the memory that is kept the longest in someone with dementia in their brain. And it's why we have such amazing insights into documentaries like Alive Inside, which talks about music and bringing people with dementia out of their shells of not talking and just sitting there, being sedentary or even catatonic. And all of a sudden they sing along with the music. It's pretty amazing. So as I write in my book, Me Time Monday, I interviewed a wonderful scientist, Charles Spence, out of the University of Oxford. He's a gastrophysicist. In fact, he's the world-renowned gastrophysicist, which is a whole new area of looking at food and also looking at neuroscience and figuring out how do we connect these two. So I wanted to give you some insights as to maybe your recipes, maybe the dishes that you're thinking about, but also the music that maybe we're playing. I mean, often, maybe we've got the football game going on in the background. I know how it's very important, but playing music during a meal is actually really comforting to a lot of people. And here's what you can think about. In his research, what he found is that if you have hypertension, you've got to take all the sodium out of your diet. So now, the salt is coming out. Now it's kind of bland. It doesn't taste so great. If you play music that has kind of deeper tones, so like baritones, think about Johnny Cash or Frank Sinatra or Johnny Hartman, one of my favorite jazz singers, anything that has that deep baritone, it'll make the food taste 38% more savory. Now, this is how our brains work, okay? They're pretty amazing things. So just by hearing that music, it tastes a little bit more savory, got a little bit more flavor. Now, on the flip side, if you've got somebody who has diabetes or you need to reduce the sugar, which we all do, we all eat too much sugar. If you need to reduce the sugar in your diet, you want to go the opposite end and you want to go to the high, tinkling pianos, high pitched sopranos. You want to think Mariah Carey, Whitney Houston, Taylor Swift, maybe put on some music like that. That will make the food taste 25% sweeter. So even though your recipe is going to maybe eliminate the salt and eliminate some of that sugar, if you still want to bring the best to your guests, think about playing some of this music while you're eating dessert or while you're eating your main meal or appetizers or whatever it is. Pretty amazing stuff going on. And again, if you want to check out more about what Charles Spence has to say about neuroscience and dining and how he's now working with long-term care communities and senior living communities, we have him on our podcast, season 2, episode 18, or you can read all about him and his research in my book, Me Time Monday, the weekly wellness plan to find balance and joy for a busy life. Almost forgot it myself there. So with that, I want to move on to pop culture. As I mentioned last episode, we talked a little bit about Bradley Cooper, the actor director who has a new documentary out on caregiving, and his personal story was caring for his dad. There are also other stories and experts that are included in that documentary that'll be seen on PBS next spring. However, there's a lot being done in this area, and another new documentary coming out is called Taking Care, The Legacies We'll Accept and Those We Won't. It's the story of Lauren Miller Rogen, who, along with her husband, Seth Rogen, they're both actors and directors. And they both also, primarily Lauren, was a caregiver for her mom who had early onset Alzheimer's. Now, Lauren's grandparents, her paternal, I think it was both her grandmother and grandfather, and then a grandmother on the other side, all had early onset. Early onset does have some genetic ties. So where there will be possibly some higher risk for Lauren and others in her family to perhaps have early onset diagnosis, which means you get diagnosed before 65. Anyway, this documentary is actually directed by James Keach. Now, you may know that name, brother of Stacy Keach, the actor, but more probably famously known for both his documentary that he did on Glenn Campbell, which was all about Glenn Campbell's last tour that he did after he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. It's so poignant and so wonderful. I interviewed James, actually. I'll have a link to that interview on our website. I interviewed James. I interviewed Kim Campbell, Glenn's wife, Ashley, his daughter, all about making that documentary, which won a lot of awards, and it's called I'll Be Me. So we'll have a link to that. But also James Keach is famous for being an Academy Award-winning director. He produced and directed Walk the Line, which was the story of Johnny Cash and, of course, his wife, June Carter Cash, where Reese Witherspoon won the Oscar for her performance, and Joaquin Phoenix was fantastic in that. So we're going to have links to all of those. And then I just want to do a quick shout out to the Glenner Adult Daycare Centers that are located in San Diego, California, but they're also the creators of Town Square, which is the wonderful thing that we talked about with Lisa Tyberski of Glenner. And it's an environment where it's called reminiscence therapy. You walk into like a life of circa 1960. It's designed specifically for those with dementia. And I don't want to get into it here because I want to point you to our interview with Lisa on our podcast from season 3, episode 31. We'll have that link. But they also have a documentary out. It's called Town Square, a documentary film about recreating the past to reclaim the present. And it's the story of creating Town Square, what they thought about, how they designed it, how they got the Disney Imagineers to consult with them. And it's just a really heartfelt documentary and really wonderful. And you can see those in different events and different things that are being done around the country. So we'll have links to all of those. So with that, I just want to say that, all of this stuff is really important as we think about gathering now for the holidays with families, and some things to think about and check out on our website and on our episode guide page. Thank you for joining me on this episode. A reminder, you can find more information in my book, Me Time Monday, the weekly wellness plan to find balance and joy for a busy life, or visit MeTimeMonday.com or caregivingclub.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Caregiving Club On Air. Please hit the subscribe button to listen to us on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, SiriusXM, iHeartRadio, Pandora, as well as other listening channels. Check out all the resources and article links on our episode guide page at caregivingclub.com. Just hit the podcast tab at the top and email us with comments and questions at podcast@caregivingclub.com. Thank you again for listening, and happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Take care and stay well.